Hi, welcome to 2020 Tasty Treats. We're doing some foundation piece blocks this time. We've got quite a few programs going this year through Tasty Treats through the GourmetQuilter website, so do have a look for more information. We've already done some of our blocks. We're doing 20 foundation piece blocks and we've done 5, so we're on to block 6 now. So this is just a diagram of the blocks that we are doing. So this time we're doing, it's probably not so easy to see, it's a little bird. It's very cute. Maybe I can show you in this little picture here. So it's going to end up as this little bird sitting on a branch. And it's very cute, but it's a little bit of a complicated block. So I thought I'd go through more the joining up process than the actual foundation piecing, because we're going to have a little tricky seam in there. But I thought if I went through it all with you, then none of these things need frighten you in the future. So I've actually gone ahead and done a little bit of my foundation piecing already. Remember, we're cutting out our pattern. If you've already registered with GourmetQuilter, you'll have the pattern to print out. We've cut all the pieces apart into separate pieces, into the segments, and leaving a little bit of a margin around each piece so that we can trim them up more accurately once the fabric's on them. And we're sewing onto the paper foundation. I am going to suggest, I have mentioned before that you might want to use a glue of some sort. I am going to be using a glue this time. It's just a glue stick. This is actually a temporary glue stick. However, any glue stick that's water soluble works really well. So any of the sort of stationary type glue sticks and things in general are water soluble, so they're fine. You don't want anything too heavy. You just want a little dab of glue, and I'll be showing you that just to hold some of the fabric in place. So that's probably something I've added into the mix to use, because, and you'll see why this time, because we're doing some segments here that are not actually pieced, and so a little piece of glue will actually help hold those on. So I'll go ahead anyway, and this is the lower segment of the bird. We've got the bird's tail here, not easy to see when it's all black and white. This is a background, this is background, and this is a little bit of the branch that the bird is sitting on. So I'll go ahead and piece this one because there's some funny little angles in here, and then I'll show you how to put the block together. So we're going to start, this is piece A. We've got A1, A2, A3 and A4. So I'm going to start off with piece A1. So I'm already going to start using the glue on this occasion because it just helps hold things in place when we've got difficulties. So I've just got my little glue stick here. As I said, nothing amazing about it. You don't want a lot of glue. Please don't be heavy-handed. It won't help in the long term. So on the back of piece A1, I'm just going to put a little dab on the paper. Just a dab. You probably can't see it. Not a lot to see. And then I'm going to position that. This is my fabric piece for A1. And I'm going to position that. I can see where I'm putting it so that it sits well and truly behind, so that when I trim that, it'll all be fine. So it's now going to stay there while I do the next stage, and it just helps hold it. So that's a good thought for that. The other thing I might suggest you do on some of these difficult angle pieces, when we're going to be having to position our fabric, and I've suggested you fold them, if you pre-fold your lines, they'll be much easier to fold when you come to have to position the next piece of fabric, like the next one that we're going to do. Because this is an unusual angle, we need to know where that piece is going to go. So if you remember, we were folding along the seam line and seeing, this is A2 that we're looking at, seeing where that's going to go next. So, and it's sticking right out here. So we've got to make sure that when we put our piece of fabric ready to sew for that, that it's going to cover that area. So to that end, I've got my piece of fabric here. This is the tail of the bird, and I'm going to position that so that every part of that piece is covered. So you may want a slightly oversized piece of fabric for some of these pieces. It's covered down here, my fold comes through here, it's covered up all around here. So I can just know that even though I seem to have a lot of fabric sitting out there, I actually need that fabric sitting out there. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm just going to stitch this line, just starting a little bit beyond and out to the edge there. So it's basically stitch and flip, but you've got to make sure you've got the right bit of flip. So when I flip that, I'm going to trim it in a minute, but I can see that that's well and truly covered that whole area. So I'm going to trim that seam as we do, so fold back my paper, trim the seam, And I am just going to quickly press that. And now I need to put my A3 piece, which is a large piece of background. And we've got the same thing, we've got quite a strong angled seam here, so if you've got little bits that are sticking through, remember, just pull the paper away there. And we want this piece here is going all the way up there, so I need to turn this piece of fabric around, make sure you've got the right side facing on this, and I'm going to position that so that this whole patch is covered up there. So again, slightly oversizing is quite helpful, so I can now know that when I stitch that seam, this piece will flip back down here again. So I'm going to go to the sewing machine and stitch that in place. And when I flip that down, we find that that is going to be absolutely fine. So I'm going to trim away all that excess there that we just don't need. I'm going to press that, and then we've just got the branch to put on. So we've actually already nearly done this whole little segment. So now that's just piece A4, which is actually a piece of the branch, and that's pretty straightforward because it's just a strip, and we can just position that, and because I've got it a bit longer I can see where it's sitting, so that I know that when I stitch along that line there, that my fabric, as long as you've got it wide enough that when it flips back there's enough fabric there to cover that. So I'll just go ahead and stitch that, and then we've done this segment apart from trimming it. So just pull my paper back out the way, trim that seam, and then press it. So that's looking pretty good. We just now need to trim that up. So I might go ahead and do the trimming. You know how to do all this, and then I'll come back and show you the next little stage with this block. So I've gone ahead, I've trimmed my lower piece with my branch and my tail. So now we've got these little segments. There's 3 segments in this this block that don't have any piecing on them, but we kind of need them to go in. It's just that nothing kind of flowed with the seams in order to get this little bird sitting on a branch. So what I've gone ahead and done is worked out that if you pop a little dab of glue, again, not lots of glue, we don't want a great big plastering of glue, just a little dab of glue, just enough to hold the fabric. Make sure that you're doing it to the wrong side of the fabric, and we can position that on, and then we can just, because that's now going to hold on that piece of paper, we can trim that up and it'll be fine. I've already done one of the segments here that you can see, even that little one there, it's actually just made the shape we want it to be. So there's actually 3, so this is one, that was a spare of that one. This segment up here is another one, E1. So again, just a little dab of glue on there, really not much glue, because you want it to be able to come away easily afterwards when we pull the papers out. So the water soluble is helpful, because that way we know that when we add water, when we spritz our papers, that that's all going to come away. And so then we just treat them as if they're a foundation piece, and just trim them up as usual, because that fabric and the paper is staying together, just as if we'd sewn it on. You could tack it on, you could use pins, but of course the pins kind of get in the way a little bit. So I think a little bit of temporary glue, or just a glue that you know will dissolve in water, works really well. So just trim up our pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and finish trimming my pieces, and then we'll start joining that block together. So I've gone ahead, I've trimmed my shapes that don't need any piecing on them, and the next thing we want to do is start joining our little bird up. So I've got piece G here, which is actually the bird's, I'll show you what we're doing here. We're going to join this piece here, the red belly of the bird. We're going to join it to the wing and head of the bird. So it's going to leave us with this Y here. So we just need to pay attention when we're joining that, because we're going to be doing a Y seam, which we can do in all sorts of patchworks, the same sort of process. We need to make sure that we can start at this end, but we need to stop here, right at where the piece stops, not go through to the end of the seam allowance, because we're going to need to be able to open that up. So I've popped a pin through at the corner here, through to the corner here, and from the corner here through to the seam line on this side. We'll need to sew it on this side, so we'll need to start here, right at where that pin is, and we can come right through to the end up here. So we've just got a little complicated seam in here, but I thought if I showed you how to do all this, if this does pop up any time for you, you'll know exactly how to manage with it. So I'm just positioning that. I need to put my needle down right on that point to start, so I can do that. And I am just going to do, well, the machine's just done a little lock stitch. I suggest a little back stitch or a lock stitch if you've got that option on your machine, just so that that point is kept nice and firm, but don't go back, stitch back into that seam allowance at all. And then just your regular seam up to the end as usual. So what we've now got is a piece, this edge will line up, but we've got a seam here, but we've got little access into that point there. So I have been pressing my seams open, but because we're doing some different sort of stitching on this block, I'm now just going to press that to one side. I want to press it basically down. So we've just sewn our seam, we've got our little gap at the end there because we stopped or started right in there, and we're pressing that down because it will make a difference later on, and you'll see that when we get to it. Next we need to put the little bird's beak on, so that's piece C. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that on, and then we can also go ahead and put the top E and F on, but I'll get this piece C put on first. So that's the little bird's beak stitched on nicely there, so that's quite good. We can press, because we're pressing this one down, it's a little bit bulky, so I think on this particular block we're just going to press everything to one side. We'll need to do that later with some other seams as well. So we can go ahead now, this little piece F down here fills in a little gap there, and this one goes on top there, so that we then get this nice straight line down here and a straight line down here. So I'll go ahead and get those on and show you the next stage. So I've gone ahead, I've put those pieces F and C on there, so we're starting to look like we've got a little bird going on here. Now we need to put this piece on behind him here with a little bit of branch in it, so we can just go ahead and stitch that one on all the way through. So this piece is a little bit shorter, but we can just stitch that in place, and because when we put the next piece on, that takes up that piece that appears to be missing. It isn't really missing. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that in place, and then I can show you how we put the next little piece in with our little Y seam. So I've stitched that long seam in there. It's sticking a little bit beyond there, but you'll see how that works shortly. And again, I've pressed that seam over to one side. So we're doing pretty well. So now we've got this little Y seam here to go in. So because we left this little piece sitting open here, we're all ready to stitch that in. So what we're wanting to do, and you may want to put a pin in here, is put a pin in that corner there, which fits into that little corner of the Y, and it's going to sit right where we've stopped stitching or started stitching, just there. So we can pop the pin in to hold it in place while we get it into position, and we can start stitching here. And when we stitch right through there, that's going to take in, and that tail, sorry, the wing of the bird sits within that space there. And we're going to stop stitching right here where we are at that point of that V. And if you hold these out of the way as you're sewing, you'll be able to do that without too much trouble. It is reasonably important that you start and stop in the right places when you're doing a Y seam. But it's all okay. We've got this far. We can do this. So we're going to stop sewing right where the little line stops, which should also match. I've pulled out of the way my little seam area here, if you can see that. Not sure if you can. And I'm going to stop sewing right at that point and do a little back stitch. Just to hold it. So that's gone well. We're well in the right place there. Now we want to flip that corner back down again, and we're going to turn this. We're going to need to clip that little seam there because we're wanting to turn that, and all this bulky seam here is fine, but we do need to just clip it. So just where that stitching is, don't clip your stitching, just clip almost into the stitching, so that when you flip this around, that's going to allow you to do that. It's a little bit harder with all this paper in here because it makes it a little bit stiff, but it will all fit. It just needs a little bit of extra TLC on this occasion. So what we've now got is a corner here, if you can see this. You've stopped stitching. This is my little cut bit on this lighter brown here, and we're going to start stitching again at that point and come out to the edge, or yes, we can do it from this side. So if we start stitching at this point in here, probably looking a bit awkward, it's because I'm trying to do it so you can see it. We're starting to stitch at this point, and we're going to come all the way out to this edge here. As I said, the paper is making it a little bit harder for me to manipulate, but it will be gone soon. So start right at that point, do a little lock stitch or a back stitch if you can, so that it's nice and firm at that corner, and then we can come all the way through out here. And there we've got it stitched in. It just needs a good press now. Now because we've had all this bulk with this paper, I'm going to peel away some of this, particularly in the seam. It can all come away now, in fact, but so that we can press this seam back down. So there is a little bit of a bulk there. However, irons are wonderful things. So just going to press that seam down there, and everything is just going to be quite wonderful, because now we have a little bird sitting on a little branch. So I think that's looking pretty good. Now if you wanted to go ahead and mark a little eye, you could do that. I've got a marking pen here, so you could embroider it, you could do a little French notch, you could do any number of things. You could machine stitch it, or you could use a permanent marking pen. I'm probably going to just use a permanent marking pen, and I'm just going to put a little dot on. So if you're not sure where the dot should go, one way of trying that out first would be a dark-headed pin. This is not a very big one. And you could pop a pin in where you think the eye should go. And if you think that's looking pretty good, then you've now got a pinhole in your fabric so that you can see where that should go. And so I'm just going to mark with my permanent, it's a Pigma pen, permanent black marker, a little eye here. Just a little slightly oval, tall oval rather than a round. And there is my little bird who can now see, and he's very happy about it. So that was a little bit more complicated to put together, that block. They're mostly not like that, but I just thought if I went through one that was more complicated, it would just help you if you run into some of those things on another occasion. So this was block 6 of our 20, so we're doing really well. We can put this one up here, and we'll see you again for Tasty Treats foundation piece, block 7. So that was it for this time. See you next time. Thank you.